Hello and welcome to the tutorial about transferring motion capture from Zemekis onto your advanced skeleton rigs. Now the process for transferring this actually utilizes the advanced skeleton icons. So you're going to need to have this installed on your system before you can use it. The actual one that we're going to be using of these four shelf icons for advanced skeleton, we're going to use the furthest one to the right, which is this sort of blue man, and when it comes up it is called the picker, and we'll be using the drop down menu from Anim to come in and use the Mocap Matcher. However, I've noticed that it kind of throws me an error if I don't first bring up this advanced skeleton menu for building the rigs. I've gotten a little bit of some complaints from the Mocap Matcher saying can't find this, can't find that, and I found that it was a bit of an eccentricity where I first needed to bring up the advanced skeleton menu and then this would be read in with no errors down here in Maya. So if it's just to make sure that that doesn't happen, always have the advanced skeleton menu up first, and then you can bring up the picker, and then from the picker you can use the drop down Anim to the Mocap Matcher. Now it uses the motion capture only if the motion capture is a reference. It actually needs the prefix that only comes from using a reference. So if I bring up the outliner here, you'll notice that the motion capture is within a group, but it has a prefix mocap, which I gave it when I read it in. So the original file, and this is one that I've sort of simulated from, I got actually from Zemekis. If I open up the original FBX file, it will come in and it will look like it's just fine. I think it's about 100 frames or so. It's a fairly short animation, and someone kind of doing this little sort of cha-cha dance. So the other thing to note is this menu we'll be using is aligning each skeleton from the mocap to a constraint in the advanced skeleton setup. And you need to have each of these that aligns, and you need to make sure that these each exist. And I was getting an error in the original setup from the Mocap Matcher setup from Motionbuilder, and I want to show you how to get past that, because it is kind of the little details that Maya tends to get stuck up on, and I'll show you a way around that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to sort of clean things up so that it's an easy transfer. And if you bring up your outliner, and only through your outliner can you investigate the prefix name for your skeleton. In this case, it's Steven Skeleton, and it runs throughout the entire hierarchy. And I'm not able to track anything other than the word hips, spine, left up leg, because you see that's exactly what aligns here. So I need this reduced down to just the word hips. So it's going to look for the word hips and look for the word spine 1, and it's not going to find it if there's a prefix, because that's not the exact name that it's looking for. So again, this is a great way to be aware of and on top of how Maya thinks. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of the prefix of this. You can come up to Modify, and you can come down to Search and Replace Names, and if you type in the prefix, if I don't want to type it in, I can actually just sort of double click, left mouse, double click on it, and do a Control C, copy, and then do a double click down here, Control V, paste. And if I say I want to replace this with, I think, anything arbitrary, replace, it actually just gets rid of the prefix. Now this is a weird eccentricity. For those of you that have noticed that I actually replaced it with a semicolon and it did not write in a semicolon, I've found that while this is an FBX, you could pretty much put anything in here, or you could put a blank in there and it will get rid of the prefix. So try a couple of things just to get rid of the prefixes, and make sure that you have it on all or hierarchy so it goes down the entire skeleton. and you should be able to wipe it clean so that everything on here is the exact name that is being looked for on the right hand side here inside the Mocap Matcher. So now this is cleaned up, and it looks like we're ready to save this as the new FBX, but you don't actually want this as an FBX. Now that we've read it in and we've cleaned it up, it should be actually saved as a Maya file. And the reason that we're saving it as a Maya file, and I'll actually give this a better name, the reason that we're going to be using this as a Maya file is because when we read this in, we actually want it to read in as a reference, because remember, we need to give it a prefix because it needs to have a prefix. Now that we've cleaned it up, you scroll down here to the bottom, it's going to look for a prefix basically saying that I'm only going to be able to grab this if it is a reference. So now that we've saved it as a Maya file, you can verify that it's going to come in clean by coming inside to create reference and make sure that you have use namespaces on, and come here to this option, used selected namespace as parent, and add the new namespace string. This is a place where you can actually type in the name of the prefix, and when you bring it in as a reference now, and remember to read it in the Maya file, not the FBX file. The reason being that I have had trouble actually reading in a referenced FBX file. It, for some reason, constantly gets rid of the prefix. In fact, I'll try it right now. If I read in test FBX and I reference that, it's going to come in. Okay, it came in fine that time, but I've had, in fact, this is not cleaned up, so we can't use it. But I've had some problems sometimes getting the FBX to read in the prefix, and the way that I've gotten around that is actually to just save it as a Maya file and having a chance to clean it up. So in the reference editor, if you want to get rid of a reference, you read it in the reference editor, left click on the name, right click, and then pop down to this menu that pops up, reference, and then go down to remove reference, and it'll ask, are you sure? You say absolutely. So at this point, I would like to read in the tuna rig, which is what we're going to be using. So I've got that right here. And this is the one downloaded from the Advanced Skeleton site, and your rig should have pretty much the same name for all of the constraints as this one. So you can actually read in the rig, or you can, let's reference the rig. Either one is fine. I like to reference the rig because remember, if you read in the rig, then you can't have any improvements in the future. But if you do have a reference, it will default. It will improve if you give any improvements to that rigged character automatically. So let's just read this in as a reference and keep things clean. So I'm going to create a reference. First one I'm going to read in is the motion capture. I'm going to reference them both. So I've got Mocap Dance. It's going to come in and it's going to have the names cleaned up. Nice. So everything says hips, spine, wonderful, good. And I need this too. There's spine 1, spine 2, great. So what I need to have is another reference of the tuna rig. So I'm going to go back into create reference, and I'm going to type in rig. And this time I'm going to reference in the rig that I'm going to be using, tuna rig. So here we are. You may have a size discrepancy, and if you do, that's okay. I'll show you how to get around that. So here's the tuna rig, much smaller, and this is not rare. When I've been doing this, the mocap's been coming in by a factor of about, scaled up by a factor of about 10. So with that in mind, let's come in here and grab the skeleton, go all the way to the top, mocap hips, and just Control G or group it. And now you have a scale factor that sits here on the floor. And you can just scale that character down, or better yet, just come in here And I've found that 0.1 is a pretty good height. So scale it down by a factor of 0.1 if that works. Your scales may vary. The size with which you rigged your character may be different. All I'm doing is I'm grouping the mocap and scaling that group so it's down kind of at the same size. Now, we are copying the motion capture onto the FK, so it actually doesn't matter the size because we're not going to be copying this over onto the IK. We're going to be copying it on the FK, and regardless of the size of this mocapped character, the rotations will always be the same. It's the scaling we've changed. The rotation values of this arm are never going to change, and that's really all we want. It's not even going to copy the translation. It's just going to copy the rotation. So it doesn't matter the size. The rotations are always going to be the same. So let's set this up. Let's continue setting this up. I've already got this out, but remember, I mentioned earlier that each of these has to be matched. And here's where Advanced Skeleton can throw you kind of a curveball. I've tried to set this up in the past and it doesn't work, and it was very frustrating. And I was saying, well, it is Motionbuilder. Look, you've got several different drop downs that you can use. You've got Mixamo, Rococo, etc. And this is a Motionbuilder capture, so it should work. Well, here's the problem. It actually needs the each of these names, and if you'll notice, this fingers and thumb, it doesn't exist. This character has no motion capture for the hands. And what happened is Advanced Skeleton expected that, got to it, didn't find it, and just quit. And really wasn't very descriptive or helpful as to why it was quitting. So what we want to do is actually modify this and delete all of these and save a new setting for our Mocap Matcher. Now, how do we do that? Well, this is a drop down. I don't know where it is, but this export button will let us know where it's saving all the configurations. So press the export button and look what you get here. You get the exact location where all the others are residing. And so you want to come up here, just double click and Control C copy, and then go into some open window you have somewhere and Control V paste. Boom, you're going to go right to where it's got all the text files, including this one for Motionbuilder. We want to make our own. Now, we can come in here and delete by hand all of these. What I find awfully messy about this setup is, although I delete it, it just kind of still stays there. So this is kind of a trick to get us to a cleaner version of the file. And that is where we come in and grab the Motionbuilder text file, Control C, Control V, we've made a copy. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to first of all rename it. And I'm going to rename it to Advanced Skeleton AS underscore, let's say Mocap, or better yet, Zemekis, which is where it's from. So I'm going to come in here now that I've changed the name, and I'm going to edit this. And this can be done in Notepad, it can be done in Microsoft Word, it can be done, I prefer Notepad++, any text editor because it's really simple text. And once it comes up, I'm just going to grab everything that we don't have on our motion capture, all this finger stuff, and delete it. Get rid of the gap and save it. And you sure you want to save? Absolutely. And just to be double plus sure, I'm going to double click it so that it pops up and shows that it is indeed gone. Wonderful. So what I can do now is, you'd think you'd be able to select it from the drop down in Mocap Matcher, but it hasn't quite got its head around it. This doesn't update in real time, so it's time to bring it up one more time. I'm going to bring up the Advanced Skeleton menu first, then the picker, then NM Mocap Matcher. It comes up, and now I can select my AS Zemekis modified file, and watch what happens. All those fingers are gone. So this is good. Now we have pretty much everything we want to set this up. And the next steps are, bring this over just a little bit more so we're actually looking at everything we need. So the next steps are that we want to make sure that we tell this Mocap Matcher the base names from these being references. Now this has been grouped. This did not inherit the reference prefix, but open it up and you've got mocap, which is what we typed in for the prefix for this motion capture here. When you click on it, make sure you know what you're doing here. This is the advanced skeleton column. This needs to be all the names of the advanced skeleton parts, as well as the prefix that you gave it for your reference, which in my case is rig. And this is the motion capture list, and the prefix is mocap. I can type it, or you can just grab one of the bones that has that prefix and it will detect it from selected. So right there, it kind of puts it in. So at this point, you want to go to maybe frame 0 and go down this series, these last series of buttons, because this is the ultimate validation that everything is ready to go. So here we go. Scan mocap skeleton. It scanned it. Zero out the mocap joints. Right there, it's kind of zeroed everything out. It's a little wonky right there. It's not completely zeroed out, so I'm going to have to watch that. I might have to kind of put that, I'm going to watch that, see if it's, if anything is sort of off. There we go, that's a little off. There we are. You can always fix it by hand. And the next button is set rig to all FK. Remember I mentioned that we're going to be copying rotation to rotation. So these are IK feet. We want the rig to be set all the way down to FK, and this is the button that does it. So watch what happens. These FK controllers will disappear. Sorry, the IK controllers will disappear and it'll turn just to FK. That's further validation. Things are going just fine. Down here, Maya's not complaining about anything. Good. And now we're set to connect mocap skeleton. Press the button and watch the additions that pop up here in the outliner. Further validation that things are fine. Connect. There you go. Mocap constraints. And if I come here to frame 0, boom, it pops into the motion. I'm allowed to play it. And our character goes into a very cool, funky dance. So that's how you set things up in Maya and get it running. But for those of you that actually want to bake this onto the skeleton, first of all, you can bring up the reference editor and simply uncheck the mocap. It'll make it disappear, but it won't get rid of it. And you can check whether or not the baking has actually happened on your rig. And if it hasn't, that's fine. You can bring the mocap back. No harm, no foul. You're going to want to come down here to Mocap Matcher and click on Bake. And now it's actually going to be baking the influence from the mocap onto the FK controllers. So once that's done, you can turn off the mocap dance and see if this character moves by themselves. And they do. So this should give you the freedom and the surety to come up and actually get rid of the mocap in this scene. You don't need it anymore. So you can right click on it, and you can save these scenes with the reference in it and just not used. That's fine. It's up to you and how you want to work. But I want to show you how to make a very clean file. And here you come into reference and then remove reference. And you say fine. It'll remove the reference. So now the only reference I have is this tuna rig, which is kind of cool. For those of you that actually want to go a step further, you can come in and make sure that you're baking things onto the FK. This is really kind of cool. If you have an animator that wants to add to the animation that is on here, if they're like, well, you know what, I actually could add a little bit of a spice to maybe that foot going up. It's currently all on the FK, which is fine if your animator knows how to work with a FK. But in case they want to do IK instead, you may want to be able to go from FK to IK for things like the leg, left and right. And it basically bakes it so that the animation curves will now be on the FK. My machine is so slow, it crashes when you do that. And I can try a bit just to show you what it looks like. But I've run this on a faster machine. Ones at school are just fine. And it's worked okay. I'll try my luck here. Okay, so it's baking the animation to the IK foot there. So this is a little easier to animate for an animator that wants things to be placed exactly where he or she puts them. And because the FK is very hard to animate when the item is stuck onto something. In this case, the foot against the floor, when there's a collision and it stops moving. It's kind of hard to animate that using just FK. So this should allow you to bake it onto the FK. Best done with no mocap reference. There you are. And this should allow you to give this to an animator if they want, so that they can animate just the IK leg. And I've done this to just the leg left. I would then do it to the leg right. I do not recommend doing it to the spine or the arms. It's not, to me it doesn't, I mean, this is my personal preference as an animator. The only thing I really need FK on is the feet. This may change depending on what it is you want your rig to do, but it's a very nice way of finishing out the animation. When you want your animations to be completely done, consider the possibility that you actually use this option, which is animation controls to bake skeleton. And what this does is it actually bakes the whole skeleton so that, well, this is done when you have the rig still here. You can bake it so that it just bakes all the way down to a simple skeleton that you can export. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, this is working, and the motion capture was successfully transferred. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, good luck.